As we gather this Sunday and hear these readings, they're really perfect readings given the fact of what is coming, meaning Ash Wednesday and Lent, and certainly perfect readings given what we have experienced in our community this past week. And these readings are also perfect because you do not need a theology degree to understand them at all. They're very plain, very clear, very simple, very straightforward. And really, the only part probably needing interpretation is the part of the gospel where Jesus is talking about, the tunic and being pressed into service, because that he's referring to particular laws of the time. But other than that, it's very clear to understand. And if you think for a moment, knowing that Lent is coming, and you listen to these readings, it hopefully will help us understand in a deeper way what we should be about starting Ash Wednesday. And as we listen to these readings and put it into relationship with the news of the last week, witnessing the sentencing of the perpetrator of the crime at Tops last summer, we saw the spectrum of Scripture being quoted and forgiveness being extended, as well as the other end of the scale of the harboring of revenge and grudges. We saw so many things. If we take all of that and really go to the Scripture, what is it that we hear in the very first reading, the book of Leviticus? Leviticus, of course, is the very heart of the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Bible. Leviticus is really dead center. We're right in the heart of the Pentateuch. Leviticus, the book of the law. And what is this law but teaching a system of cleanliness and holiness? And it's these concepts, these realities of cleanliness, of sacrifice, of the meaning of the priesthood, Leviticus, Levitical law, the law of the priesthood. And this call of holiness is really the matrix on which and the matrix from which the New Testament describes the life of Jesus. The book of Leviticus is concerned with Levitical law. And today's reading is really part of what we call the holiness code. And we hear very clearly of the behavior necessary for the Israelites, the behavior necessary for you and me to be a holy person. And what do we hear very clearly? Do not live in hatred. Do not seek revenge. Do not harbor grudges. I will not ask for a show of hands, but if I did, I promise you my hand would have to go up, that probably all of us at many times in our life have been confronted with hatred. Many of us have been confronted with harboring grudges. Many of us have been confronted with thoughts and feelings of revenge. Unfortunately, it's part of the human condition. And we're told very clearly that we are not to live in hatred, revenge, or harboring a grudge. Again, if you watched the video footage from the courtroom this past week, you saw the spectrum of those offering words of forgiveness, and we saw the other end of the spectrum of those calling for revenge, filled with tremendous anger. And I dare say it made me take a step back and think, if I was in their situation and I have no idea what it would mean to feel to be in their situation, how is it that I would respond in that given moment? If you take that along with the gospel, Jesus is speaking very plainly in the gospel. In very plain language, he says, it's not very impressive to love the people who love you in return. Big deal about that. If you love others who love you, big deal. Doesn't mean much. He said, if you really want to be a disciple, if you really want to be that disciple who's set apart, You love those people who can't stand you. That's who you love. And if you really want to be that disciple set apart, you love the people who you personally can't stand being with. That sets a disciple apart. The message of love, meaning how well do you love the person who hates you online? How well do you love the person who maybe hates you in line? And how well do you love the person who hates you in person? How well do you love the person who simply rolls their eyes every time that you speak in their presence? These are the individuals that really test our capacity to love. Simple and easy to love those who love us in return, but when we meet those challenging individuals in our life, that becomes the test, how well our capacity is to love. The readings really remind us to love with the right intention, and that intention is to simply love in the name of Christ, not to love with anything expected in return, but to love for the gift of love. And the scripture warns us about the dangers of harboring the grudges and the hatred and the revenge. And why? Because we hear very clearly we're concerned about this temple. We hear very clearly that the Spirit dwells within this temple. And as we get ready for Lent, it's this temple we got to think about. And we got to think about where the Spirit is alive in our mind, heart, and soul, and perhaps where we are a little distant away, where we've allowed that harboring of grudge or ill will or revenge to take root. The psalm reminds us very clearly of the antidote, the Lord is kind and merciful. And it's almost one of those hallmark refrains. Willow sang it so beautifully, and it almost gives you the warm fuzzies. The Lord is kind and merciful. That's a beautiful statement. Of course, it's a true statement. But the statement doesn't end there. The statement means that we need to be kind and merciful. In a few moments at Mass, we will pray the prayer that I trust each one of us here in church offers multiple times a day. We're going to pray the Our Father. And that's a very dangerous prayer. And it's a dangerous prayer because right in the heart of the prayer, what do we hear? Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So what is it that we say? Well, Lord, forgive me in the same measure that I'm forgiving others. Lord, forgive me with mercy and compassion, the same level of mercy and compassion I use to forgive other individuals. Lord, be kind and merciful towards me in the exact same way that I am kind and merciful towards others. It is a very dangerous prayer to offer. I remember many years ago when I was the vocation director, and I remember getting a phone call at my office, and it was one of those calls at the onset you didn't know where we were going. And this woman on the other end said, I'm calling to talk to you about that new young priest you just ordained and sent to our parish. And that didn't sound very good. And I had to assure her that I did not ordain him or send him. I may have, oversaw some of the formation, but I did not do the sending. But fortunately, the plane landed well. And she said, he gave a homily at Mass on Sunday about forgiveness. And immediately after Mass, I did not even stop at my house. Immediately, I got in the car and I drove for 4 hours to my sister's home. And I haven't spoken to her in years. And I went to her home and I asked for forgiveness. That's what Lent's about. To do something that is more important than giving up chocolate or ice cream or pizza, but to eliminate the hatred, the sense of revenge, the harboring of grudges. That is what Lent is really about, and the work of reconciliation that we're to be part of. Didn't we see the same thing in both ends of the spectrum in the news with the sentencing of the perpetrator of the crime at Tops? We saw some calling for revenge and some almost still shell-shocked. I can't imagine what their lives are like. But we also saw some individuals who stood up to do something. We saw a mother of one of the victims who survived now running for council. I want to do something to make this community better. And early on in this whole news story, we saw one individual who had a stellar career in public service say, I'm part of the problem because I've lived here my whole life. I've seen what was going on, but I didn't really stand up in a great way to do anything. And now, after my mother has been shot, now I know I have to do something more. That's what Lent calls us to, and that's what our community needs for us to stand up. What is it that we know about forgiveness? Forgiveness is a daily discipline. It's not something that just happens once in a while. It's the fabric of life. And what are we called to in this temple? We're called to be holy. That word holy and holiness has been used in the scripture this weekend. And what does it really mean to be holy? It means that we imitate God daily, not just once in a while, but daily, day in and day out. We imitate the Lord. That's holiness. Holiness is not just morally choosing the right thing. Of course, that's part of it, no question. But holiness really means that we are desiring to be set apart and to associate ourselves with the life of God. Holiness is moral virtue, but it's also justice. It's also mercy. It's also forgiveness. That is holiness. That's what this temple needs to be about. In the gospel, Jesus is not changing the laws or the rules, but he's giving a new context to live them. Jesus is asking his disciples to do what? To go above and beyond the call of duty, to go above and beyond what they were accustomed to doing. That's ultimately the bottom line of what Jesus is saying. The Jews were allowed to seek restitution when they were wronged, just like we do in our own culture today. Jesus, though, challenges them to forgive, not just to seek restitution. And that is what we need to question in our culture today. Do we even know how to forgive, or is it just restitution and revenge? Jesus is, in that example of the tunic, give them the cloak as well. He's saying, go above the legal claim. Go above instead and do what is right. Do what is more and above the call of duty. Jesus is certainly not calling someone to be a victim or to be abused in any way, but rather to look to the care of others with greater mercy, forgiveness, and compassion. And so as we look upon these readings, we're really given great readings to reflect upon, to prepare for Ash Wednesday. And hopefully we take these readings with us and we read them over and over and think, where are we with hatred and revenge? Where are we with harboring a grudge? Do we truly love for the sake of loving, or do we only love those who love us in return? Where are we? We're going up above the call of duty, or do we just do the bare minimum? And when we see whatever it is in our life that doesn't meet that standard of the readings today, now we found what we have to work on for Lent, above giving up the candy and the cookies and many other things, to work on these more substantial, transforming elements of faith. And if we do so and take it seriously, how greater the joy and understanding of the resurrection of Easter Sunday will be.